Hey, this is Chris Plush from CG Masters, and in this series, what we're going to be doing is creating a combat knife game asset step by step from start to finish. And in this first part here, we're going to be working on the high poly version of the model. Now we're going to start things off by changing something real quick in the user preferences. So let's go up to File, go down to User Preferences, and over in the Editing tab, let's set Align to View instead of World. That's just going to make it so whenever we add an object, it's going to align that object to that particular view we're in. And this is something that I have as default, so it's just going to help you better follow along with these tutorials if you set it to that as well. And now let's click on Save User Settings, and we can close out of that. So now let's start things off by adding in a reference photo in the background. So let's press numpad 1 for front view, and then press the N key for the right side toolbar. Let's scroll down to the bottom and expand the background images panel, and then click on Add Image. Now let's click on Open, and go into wherever you saved your reference picture, knife front, and we'll load that in. So now we see it in the background in front view. Let's make sure it just displays in front view. So we'll change the axis from all views to just front. And now we'll turn the opacity down to 0.4 so it's a little bit more transparent. And let's rotate it as well. Let me drag that over. Let's change the rotation value to -90 so that it's standing straight up. Alright, now I'll press A once or twice until everything in the scene is selected. Then I'll press X and I'll delete everything. Alright, let me press N to get rid of the right side toolbar, and now we're ready to start modeling. So now let's press Shift and S and choose Cursor to Center to make sure the cursor is in the middle of the world. And now I'll press numpad 7 for top view, and let's add a circle in by pressing Shift and A, and then add a mesh circle. Now immediately press the T key for the left side toolbar. We're going to need this operator menu in the bottom left. And let's change the number of vertices to the number we want our final real-time model to have. So I'm going to change the number down to 20. And then I'll press T to get rid of that. And now let's tab into edit mode, and with all the vertices selected, we'll press numpad 1 for front view, and we'll start shaping the handle. So let me press S to scale that down to about right there. Then I'll press G, and I'll move that right into the center of the top of the handle right there. Then I'll press S and scale it down a little bit more to match the size. Now let me zoom out a little bit, and I'll press E to extrude, and then the Z key to constrain the extrusion to the Z axis. And we'll bring it all the way down to the thinnest part of the bottom of the handle there. We're going to handle just the bulbous part of this shape first, and then we'll work on creating the pommel at the bottom. Alright, now let's press the Z key for wireframe view, and now we need to add some edge loops in to match up with the 5 ridges in the handle. So I'm going to press Ctrl and R to add an edge loop, and I'll add it right through the middle right there, and then scroll up on the mouse until I have 5 cuts. And I'll left click and then right click to keep those new cuts in the middle. And now we need to shape this. So we're going to use something called proportional vertex editing. And what that tool does is when you move a selection, the vertices around it will also move along with it based on a fall off. Now we're going to scale things out from the center. So let's select that middle set of vertices by holding Alt and right clicking on that edge right there to select that whole loop of vertices. And now let's enable proportional vertex editing by pressing the O key. And now if we press S to scale that up, you can see the vertices around our selection are scaling along with it, but to a lesser degree the further away from the selection they are. So that's how this fall off works, and that's how this proportional vertex editing tool works. And we can change the fall off by using the scroll wheel on the mouse as well. Anything within that circle is going to be affected by this scaling. So let me right click to cancel that. So right now by default, in this menu down here, our proportional editing fall off is set to smooth. But that's not quite the shape we're looking for this bulbous handle. But as you can see from the icon of the sphere option, that's definitely more like the shape we're looking for. So let me click on sphere, and that's just going to give us a more bulbous shape when we go to scale this away. Now let's press S to start scaling this up, and you can see that things are scaling on the Z axis as well. We don't want those edge loops to move out of place vertically. So let me press Shift and Z, and that will lock the Z axis. So now we're just scaling on the X and Y axis. So use the scroll wheel on your mouse and increase the fall off to about right there, I think looks good. And scale up your vertices to about right there. I'm looking at the left side of the reference photo and trying to match that shape. Oh crap, I accidentally right clicked. Let me try that again. Shift and Z, and then I'll scale it to right there. All right, so scale your handle to right there, and then left click this time, not right click. All right, so that's looking good so far. Now we need to move each one of these edge loops down to meet up with the ridges in the photo. So let me press B, and then left click and drag over all of these vertices, and we're going to slide them down. But first let's turn off that proportional editing tool. So press the O key to turn that off. Now let me zoom into about right here so all the ridges are in view. Then I'll press G twice and edge slide these down here to the middle of the top and bottom ridges like that, and then left click. And now let's scale this up by pressing S and then Z. Scale it up on the Z axis until each edge loop is aligned with its respective ridge, and then left click. All right, so that's looking good to me. Now you can see the bottom of the handle here gets a little bit thinner than the top. That's why these few bottom circles of vertices are out of alignment. So let me hold Alt, right click on the bottom edge there to select that loop. Then I'll press S to scale it in to about right there, just kind of eyeing up the scale, and then left click. Now I'll press G and move it on top of the photo just to see if it aligns, and that looks good to me. So I'll right click to move it back. But now we need to smooth out the bottom by scaling in the two edge loops above that a little bit. So let me hold Alt, right click on that one, press S to scale it in to about right there, and left click, and then we'll do the same thing with this. Scale that in until we have a nice smooth curve on the side. All right, so that looks like it's aligning a lot better. And so far, so good. So now let's pan down to the bottom and we'll work on the pommel. Let me hold Alt, right click on that edge loop there to select it. And let me move this up a little bit. I don't think it's quite at the lowest point in the pocket here. So I'll press G and then Z, move it up to about right there, and left click. And now let's press E to extrude it, and then press Z to constrain it to the Z axis, and we'll drop this right there. Now press S to scale it up, and we're gonna just eye this up at this point and try and match the shape of the photo in the background. So I'll left click right there. I think that looks about right. And now let's press E and then Z and extrude it down again to wherever the bottom of the pommel is, which is kind of hard to tell in the photo because there's a lot of perspective going on, but I think this height looks about right. So now I'll press S and we'll scale that in to about right there. Now we need to round off the side. So what I'll do is add an edge loop down the middle and just scale it up. So let's press Ctrl and R right through the center, left click, and we'll drag that down a little bit since it looks like it's a little flatter up top and then it rounds off more toward the bottom. And now let's press S and we'll scale that up to match the same shape as the reference photo, and then left click. So that looks about right to me. And now let me rotate the view so I can see the bottom here, and I'll select these three vertices and press F. Those are the three vertices in the front, and then select those two and press F all the way through until the entire bottom is faced up like that. Now while the pommel at the bottom is round, the handle shape itself is oblong. But right now we have it perfectly circular, so we're going to have to squash that a little bit now. So let me press numpad 3 for side view, and let me center this. And I'll press Z for wireframe, and then press A to deselect everything. Now let's press B, and left click and drag over all these vertices. So we're going to be scaling this just on the Y-axis to squash it and create that oblong shape. So let's press S, and then Y to scale it on the Y-axis, and then type in the value 0.75, and then press Enter. So that's scaled it on the Y-axis to a value of 0.75 and creates that oblong shape for us. Nice. And now let's press numpad 1 for front view. We'll zoom into the pommel. Let's round off this area right here. So let's add an edge loop by pressing Ctrl and R right through the middle there, then left click and right click to keep it in place. Now press S to scale it in, and that's nice and round there. So let's press numpad 3 for side view now. And we're going to need to scale it in on the Y-axis a little bit as well to create more of a roundness on the side. So I'll press S and then Y, scale it in a little bit till we have a nice roundness there. All right, that looks good from front view and side view. All right, now what we'll do is create the actual ridges for the handle. So let me press the Z key for wireframe, and then let's go into edge select mode by going down into the menu here and clicking on edge select. Now let's hold Alt, right click on that edge loop right there, then hold Alt and Shift, and we'll right click on that one, that, and that. Now what we're going to do is bevel all of these edge loops to create the amount of geometry we need to actually create these ridges. So let me zoom into the top one here, and I'll press the T key for the left side menu because we're going to need that operator menu. So let's press Ctrl and B to activate the bevel tool and scale that up until it's the right height of those ridges. So somewhere around right there looks good. Then I'll left click. Now let's create a couple of edge loops in the middle of that by going over to the operator menu and increasing the number of segments to 3 so we have 2 edge loops in the center. Now let's press T to get rid of that menu, and let's switch back to vertex select mode in the menu down there. And let's hold Alt, right click on that edge loop, hold Alt and Shift, and we'll right click on all of the middle edge loops now, all the way down for each ridge. Now let me zoom in, and in order to shrink all of these in, we simply press Alt and S, and we'll shrink them in for us and we'll just shrink it into the amount that looks right to us. So I think that looks good. All right, cool. Now, if you're not familiar with the shrink tool, let me just demonstrate real quickly why I chose to press Alt and S to shrink these in instead of simply pressing S to scale them in. So let me duplicate that. I'll go into top view and I'll stretch it wide. So when you're dealing with non-circular or non-symmetrical shapes, and you simply press the S tool or the S key to scale things in normally, you can see the length of that edge is nowhere near the same as the length of that edge. However, if I go and press Alt and S, you can see that all of these vertices are being shrunken in proportionally, so all of these edges have pretty much the same length. So because we're working with an oblong handle, that's why I chose to press Alt and S to shrink things in instead of scale them. All right, moving on. Let's zoom into the top of the handle here. I'll press Z for wireframe, and you can see that the handle dips in right there and then fans out a little bit at the top. So we already have our top edge loop in place. Let's add another one in by pressing Control and R through there, left click, and we'll drag it up to right there, and then left click. And now let's press Alt and S to shrink it in again, and just match it up with the photo like that, and then left click. All right, that looks good. Let's go into side view. Looks good there too. Now we're going to be doing some work on the front of the handle that is also on the back of the handle. So instead of doing that work twice, what I'm going to do is just delete the back half and mirror the front to the back. So let me press numpad 3 for side view, and I'll zoom out like that. I'll press A to deselect everything, and then I'll press Z for wireframe. Let's press the B key, and I'll left click and drag over all the right side vertices like that. Then I'll press X and delete the vertices. So we should be left with this half a slice of a handle. So let's add that mirror modifier in now. So let's go over to the modifier buttons here, click on add modifier and select mirror. Now let's turn off X and turn on Y, and that's going to mirror it from front to back for us, and we're good to go. So let's create that flat spot at the top of the handle now. So I'll press numpad 1 for front view, then press Z for wireframe. So you can see the flat spot in the photo right there. And the first thing we'll do is select the top 5 middle vertices that are in the middle of that flat spot. I'll press X and I'll delete them. Now let's select these 3 vertices and press F, and then these 3 and press F. So we're just going to create a hole where that area is and just get the general shape going, and then we'll face up the whole middle. Now let me select these 3 vertices. I'll press G twice to edge slide them all the way down to about right here, then left click, and I'll select that vertex, and we'll round off the bottom by pressing G twice, and we'll slide that down to there. All right, now let's select these 3 vertices and press F. Now let's select those 2 and press F up to the top. Now if I tab out of edit mode, you can see the area is not perfectly flat. Now there's a handful of ways to flatten this manually, but you can also flatten this automatically with an add-on. Let's do it that way. So let's go into the File menu, go down to User Preferences, and over on the Add-ons tab, in the search field here, type in Loop, and the Loop Tools add-on pops up. So make sure you check the box next to it to enable that. And we can close that, and let me tab back into edit mode, and I'll select all the vertices of the flat spot there. Then I'll press the W key for the special menu, and there's a new menu at the top called Loop Tools. From that menu, select Flatten. And I'll tab out of edit mode, and you can see that it flattened the whole area for us. So now we're pretty much done with the low poly version of the handle, and from here on we're going to be creating high details or high resolution details for it that we don't want to include on the low poly version. So let's duplicate this and move it to another layer. So let me press tab to get out of edit mode, and I'll press Shift and D to duplicate it, and then right click to keep it in place. Now I'll press the M key to move it to a new layer, and I'll move it to the second layer. Now let's select our original handle. I'll press the T key for the left side toolbar and choose smooth shading for this. I'll press T to get rid of that. Now let's tab back into edit mode, and the first thing we'll do is cap the top. So let me select those 2 vertices there and press F twice to face it to the middle. Now what we're going to do is use the bevel modifier to create some nice detailed bevels for us on all the ridges, and we're going to use the subsurf modifier as well to make sure everything's nice and smooth. So now let's go over to the modifiers and add in a bevel modifier. Now by default the limit method is set to none. That means it's going to be beveling every single edge. That's why it's giving us this very faceted look. We want just bevels around the ridges and a few other points. So what we're going to do is set the limit method to weight, and that's going to allow us to apply weight to the individual edges that we actually want to bevel. So let me tab back into edit mode, and let's switch to edge select mode. So let's go down into the 3D header and click on that icon to switch over to edge select. And let me hold Alt and right click on that edge loop, then hold Alt and Shift, and I'll right click on all of those, And what we're doing now is just selecting all the edges that we actually want to bevel. Now I'll hold Shift and right click on that one. And now we'll go down and select each of the individual edge loops around the ridges. So I'll hold Alt and Shift and I'll right click on all of these down the line. And I'll also select that edge loop and these as well. All right, so those are all the edges that I want to bevel. So now let's press the N key for the right side toolbar, scroll all the way up to the top, and under Edges Data, there's a mean bevel weight option. So let's increase that to 1, and that adds a full bevel weight to all of those selected edges. So now our bevel modifier is actually beveling all the edges we just selected. So things are getting a bit more definition now, but we still have a little work to do. So right now I think the beveling is too wide. You can see that these bevels here are way too soft. So let's decrease the bevel width down to 0.01. And that makes tighter bevels for us, but we also need more segments. It's not very high resolution there. So I'll increase the number of segments up to 2. All right, that's looking much better already. So we're done with the bevel modifier. Now we need to smooth everything out by adding a subsurf modifier. So I'll click on Add Modifier and add a subdivision surface modifier. And I'll increase the subdivisions to 2 or 3. I'm going to increase it to 3. I'll make sure to increase the render level to 3 as well. And there we go. So let me just double check everything from top to bottom. Make sure all the bevels look nice. And they do. I'm kind of tired of looking at the gray, so I'm going to enable a matte cap. So while I'm in shaded view, in the right side toolbar, let's scroll down and enable matte caps there. Then I'll click on that icon there and we have a list of matte caps here. I'm going to select this one here. This is very nice to look at. Then I'll press the N key and get rid of that toolbar. And now we're going to work on that little ridge toward the bottom of the pummel there. Now because we'll be scaling circles up and down, it's probably just going to be easier if we apply the mirror modifier. That way we're not dealing with half circles the whole time. So let me get out of edit mode and I'll click on apply on the mirror modifier. Now let's tab back into edit mode. I'll press numpad 1 for front view and let's add an edge loop right through the middle here. Let me switch back to vertex select mode in the header down there. And I'll press Control and R and left click through the middle there and then right click to keep it in place. And let me press S and I'll scale that in a little bit as well to keep that curvature going. Now let me zoom in and let's press Control and R through there, left click, and we'll drag it up right underneath the other edge loop. And left click to place it there. Then press S and we'll scale that in like that. And now let's add a hard edge there by surrounding these with other edge loops. So I'll press Control and R through there, left click, and I'll drag it up to there. And now press Control and R down here, left click, and we'll drag it up to right there. And let's see how that looks so far. So it's looking pretty good. We could probably soften that up a little bit. So let me go back into front view and zoom in. I'll hold Alt, right click on that edge loop, and I'll press G twice and I'll slide it that way a little. And let's hold Alt and right click on the inner edge loop right there. And I'll press S and I'll scale that in for a bigger dip, for a bigger crease. And that's looking better. Now let's sharpen up this bevel right here. So I'll press Control and R there, left click, and I'll drag it up to there. All right, something like that looks pretty good. And yeah, I think that's about all we need to do with that.